She's going to be brave, concise, because that which they are presenting is their statement of intent, which will be in the C20 policy pack in terms of how persons with disability organized under D20 wants to see things happening and how they happen. So without much ado, Dr. Nzo, I am giving over the floor to you. Please put your video on so that you take center stage as I exit the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Mabalani. I want to apologize that I'm struggling with my video. I really would have loved to keep it on. I'm wearing the same C20 t-shirt and I would have loved to show it off. But I will start with my message of intent titled, Nothing About Us Without Us. This is a letter of intent for disability justice here at the C20. And I, again, am Dr. Zukiswa Nzo, a Black South African woman, a wheelchair user, an activist, a researcher. So, Chair, distinguished delegates, colleagues, and friends, when I wheel into a room, I carry more than my research. I carry the roads that are still not paved, the buildings that are still having no ramps, and the voices of rural women who wake before dawn to chase opportunities that remain just out of reach. I carry history too, our collective history as persons with disabilities, of being spoken about instead of with. It was in 1981 when the world, for the first time, called disability a global issue. The United Nations named it the International Year of Disabled Persons. The theme was full participation and equality. For the first time, governments were told, people with disabilities are not patients. We are citizens. Then came the United Nations Decade of Disabled Persons, 1983 to 1992. Policies multiplied, committees were formed, and somewhere in the middle of it, a new movement was born. A movement that refused to be grateful for charity or silenced by pity. We called ourselves Disabled Peoples International, and we shouted a phrase that has never lost its power. Nothing about us without us. That phrase, my friends, traveled from conferences in rooms in New York to the dusty towns of Global South and to communities like mine. If policy marked the beginning, people made the movement. It emerged from disabled people's own organizing. Its modern embrace in disability politics reminds us that policy without participation repeats paternalism. After years of advocacy, the world then adopted the UNCRPD, opening signature in 2007 and entering into force in 2008. This was a landmark in human rights that reframed persons with disabilities as rights holders and as agents. My colleagues and friends, I recount this history not as a detached scholar, but as mentioned earlier, as a Black South African woman, as a wheelchair user, as an activist, as a researcher. I stand here hearing the work of communities who fought for ramps that were never poured, who fought for buses that never lowered their steps, for screens that never spoke, for jobs that never materialized, and for dignity that never wavered. In South Africa, our struggle for inclusion was woven into our struggle for freedom. This is history again. When democracy came, our Constitution of 1996 declared equality for all, and for the first time, disability stood in law as a human right, not as a medical condition. We crafted frameworks in South Africa, such as the White Paper, the strategic plans. The white paper on the rights of persons with disabilities spoke of barrier removal, empowerment, and dignity. And yet, every time I roll past a staircase without a ramp, I am reminded that policy is not the same as practice. In my recent research, I traveled between two South Africas, the rural Limpopo and the urban Gauteng. A rural Limpopo of Rosani, who reads with a magnifier because Braille came too late, and the urban Gauteng of Palesa, who runs a small perfume business from her home, selling scents door to door because formal jobs are closed to blind women. I also met Lucas, a man who lost his sight after finishing school, who still believes that education, not charity, is the key to dignity. Their stories are not just examples, colleagues. These are stories of evidence. Evidence that despite decades of good policy, economic empowerment of persons with disabilities remains the exception, not the norm. And now we are living in a digital age where government, commerce, and even communities are increasingly online. The G20 under South Africa's leadership in 2025 has made digital inclusion a national priority. But inclusion cannot be achieved if it's not affordable and not accessible. If AI cannot recognize our voices, if digital platforms cannot read our screens, if public data systems are not interoperable, then we are not just left behind. Colleagues, we are locked out. Digital transformation without accessibility is simply a new form of exclusion, just wearing a modern name. Technology must not only be smart, it must be just. AI must not only be intelligent, it must be inclusive. Digital public infrastructure must not only connect, it must empower. What does that mean? That means devices that speak to those who cannot see. That means websites navigable by everyone, regardless of ability. That means procurement systems that test for accessibility before approval. What does that mean? That means innovation funds that invest in homegrown assistive technologies. Because this question is not whether the future will be digital anymore. The question is whether it will be equitable. My friends, intersectionality is not a theory. It's a daily reality. I stand before you as a Black person. I stand before you as a woman. I stand before you as a wheelchair user. These identities do not take turns. They all arrive together at once. So when I roll into a government building, I am reminded that sexism, racism, and ableism often sit at the same table. And guess what? They're all eating well. Intersectionality means that if policy only sees one of my identities, it will fail all of them. And yet, intersectionality is also where the greatest possibility lies. So when we design for those at the margins, we build systems that work better for everyone. So as we gather under the banner of the C20, with themes of solidarity, equality, sustainability, I offer this intent. Redefine inclusion, not as an afterthought, but as a design principle. Fund accessibility as infrastructure, not as charity. Measure success, not by policy adoption, but by lived access. Move from learnerships to livelihoods, from pilots to permanence. Build digital economies that reflect human diversity, that do not erase it. My personal pledge is, when I was younger, I actually dreamt of a world where ramps were the norm, where buses lowered their steps, where schools welcomed every child. Today, I dream of a world where the code itself is inclusive, where digital systems recognize every human voice, where AI does not reproduce our biases, and where innovation means freedom, not exclusion. I speak today not as a statistic, but as a survivor of policy gaps, a witness to resilience and a believer in change. I speak for the millions whose names never make it into any declarations, for the rural woman, for the child navigating gravel roads with dignity, for the blind entrepreneur reinventing independence, for the young graduate waiting for the system to believe in his capability. When coming to our shared future, the G20 is not just gathering of economies. It is actually gathering of futures. And if we are honest, the measure of our progress will not be the size of our GDP, but the breadth of our humanity. So let the summit be remembered not only for the words we spoke, but for the access we built, the lives we touched, and the barriers we broke. In closing, my fellow friends, please know this and please note this as my final plea. My final plea for recognition of the D20, formal recognition of the D20 as an engagement group. The D20 stands as living proof that when persons with disabilities lead, not follow, the conversation, the world becomes fairer, wiser, and more humane. Throughout the 2025 presidency in South Africa, we have worked as the D20 tirelessly, coordinating across continents, shaping policy submissions through the C20, and amplifying lived experiences to ensure that disability is no longer peripheral, but central to global governance. Throughout the D20 process, there has been collaborations with the C20 and the broader G20 process. We are redefining inclusion, not as an act of benevolence, but as an act of justice. We are proving that inclusion is not charity. It is actually governance. So together with South Africa's G20 presidency, we are setting a new global standard, one that is grounded in solidarity, equality, and sustainability. A standard where accessibility is infrastructure, not an afterthought. Where representation is participation, not tokenism. And where leadership by persons with disabilities is recognized as essential to the world's collective progress. Colleagues, this is the future we claim. A G20 that does not merely speak of equality, but practices it boldly, visibly, together, leaving no one behind. Because the promise made in 1981 with the history that I recounted still echoes. Full participation, equality, dignity. And because the words of our movement still stand. Nothing about us without us, ever again. Thank you.